Clara Bellamy hurled the tray of crystal glasses onto the kitchen floor and let every single one of them shatter. She stood over the wreckage, her chest heaving, her hands shaking, because she had just watched Nathaniel Carter, the wealthiest rancher in Willow Creek, cross an entire ballroom full of silk-dressed women to reach her. Not Pearl Whitmore, not the banker's daughter, her. The maid. The woman every person in that room had spent the entire evening looking through like she was made of air. And she had no idea what to do with that. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to our channel and follow every single part to the end, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about who deserves to be shown. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far Clara's story travels. The night it started, Clara was invisible. That was not an accident. Invisibility was the one skill she had spent her entire life perfecting: the lowered eyes, the quiet step, the way she could move through a room full of people without a single person registering that she had passed. She was good at it. Better than good. She had started practicing at 12 years old, the first time she understood what the world had decided about women built like her, women who came from families like hers. Women who wore dresses like the faded blue cotton she had mended 4 times and was wearing tonight. She had been invisible for so long that some mornings she checked the mirror just to confirm she still had a reflection. The Dawson family's annual summer ball was the biggest social event in Willow Creek, Montana, and in the summer of 1884, it had exactly one purpose: to give every wealthy family in the county a formal opportunity to position their daughter in front of Nathaniel Carter. Clara had heard the planning for 3 weeks through the thin walls of the boarding house dining room where she worked. Mothers debating hairstyles, fathers rehearsing how they would introduce themselves. Young women whispering to each other about whether Nathaniel Carter preferred dark colors or light ones on a woman, as though the man were a painting they were trying to match to a wall. Clara had listened to all of it and felt nothing, or told herself she felt nothing, which was close enough to the same thing that she had stopped examining the difference. She was there to work. Mrs. Hutchins, who owned the boarding house and was not an unkind woman but was absolutely a practical one, had sent her to the Dawson house because 2 girls had called in sick and the side tables needed managing. Clara's job was to keep the water glasses filled, keep the empty plates moving, and stay close enough to the wall that no one had to acknowledge she existed. She was 26 years old. She had been doing versions of this job since she was 15. She tied her hair back, checked her pins, and walked in through the back entrance. The hall was already bright and loud by the time she started her first round with the pitcher. She recognized almost everyone. Willow Creek was not a large town, and the boarding house put her in contact with most of its residents eventually. But recognition was not acknowledgement, and she moved through the crowd the way water moves around stones, finding the paths between people without disturbing them. Pearl Whitmore was there in a dress the color of heavy cream, her hair arranged with the kind of architectural ambition that required a second person and considerable patience. Josephine Aldrich stood near the musicians with her chin lifted at an angle Clara recognized immediately as practiced. She had seen Josephine rehearsing that angle in the boarding house hallway mirror twice in the past month. Helen Beaumont's mother was speaking very fast in the corner to a woman Clara didn't know, the way people speak when they are pretending to have a conversation, while actually monitoring something else entirely. What they were monitoring arrived at 7:30. Clara was at the far side table, straightening the serving spoons, when the particular quality of noise in the room shifted, not louder, not quieter, but differently arranged. The way sound rearranges itself when everyone in a space simultaneously redirects their attention. She did not look up. She already knew what had walked through the door. She kept straightening spoons. Nathaniel Carter had been the county's most eligible bachelor for the past 4 years. Ever since his father, William Carter, had transferred primary management of the Carter Ranch to him, and the county had collectively decided that a young man with 10,000 acres and excellent cattle bloodlines needed a wife. Clara knew his face the way she knew most faces in Willow Creek from a distance in passing, with no expectation of recognition in return. She had seen him at the feed store, at the church on Christmas morning. Once a year ago, at the edge of town on a gray horse, moving at a pace that suggested he was late for something but refusing to hurry. She had registered him, the way she registered weather, as a condition of the world that did not specifically involve her. She went back to the kitchen for a second pitcher. When she returned, the social geometry of the room had reorganized itself around Nathaniel, with the efficiency of iron filings around a magnet. He was standing near the center with a cluster of men who wanted to talk cattle prices, and a radius of women wanted to talk about anything else as long as it kept them within his line of sight. Pearl Whitmore had achieved what could only be described as a strategic position, close enough to be visible, far enough to look natural. Josephine Aldrich had found something to laugh at, and the laugh was calibrated to carry. Nathaniel was answering a question about spring grazing with the patience of a man who had answered the same question 300 times. He did not look at Pearl Whitmore. He did not look at Josephine Aldrich. He looked from across the room directly at Clara. She was so unprepared for it that she nearly missed her step. She caught herself against the edge of the table, and the look was over by the time she steadied. His attention had moved back to the man talking at him, and she was already questioning whether it had happened at all. Men like Nathaniel Carter did not look at hired women carrying water pitchers. She had constructed the entire encounter from nothing. She was tired and the room was warm, and she was imagining things. She went back to work. She was on her fourth circuit of the room when the rug caught her. It was an old rug, its corner curled up from years of foot traffic, and in the new configuration of the dance floor it had ended up exactly where Clara was walking. Her foot caught it mid-stride and she stumbled, not a fall, not even close, but enough to send water sloshing over the rim of the pitcher, enough to make a sound, enough to make two women turn. Pearl Whitmore turned, looked at her, looked away. It was a 3-second sequence that Clara had experienced in various forms her entire life, and she absorbed it the same way she always did, without expression, without reaction. With the practiced steadiness of someone who has learned that the only thing worse than being dismissed is letting people see that it landed. She pressed her wet sleeve against her side, adjusted the pitcher, and kept moving. That corner's been catching people all evening. She stopped. Nathaniel Carter was standing 2 feet to her left, close enough that she should have seen him coming if she had been watching anything except the floor. He was taller than she had registered from across the room, broad in the shoulders, with the particular build of a man whose body had been shaped by actual work rather than appearance. His jacket was good quality and slightly unfamiliar on him, the way formal clothes look on men who spend most of their time in canvas and leather. He was looking at the curled rug corner, not at her wet sleeve. Not at Pearl Whitmore's retreating back. Saw 2 men go down on it earlier, he said. Nobody's fixed it. He looked at her then directly, and his eyes were dark and steady and completely unperforming. You all right? Yes, sir. The response came out automatically, the way it always did. You sure? Quite sure, sir. Thank you. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are accepting an answer, without being entirely convinced by it. He did not move. This was the part she did not know how to account for. He did not move. Men of his position, caught in accidental proximity to serving women, generally resolved the situation by redirecting themselves elsewhere, smoothly, the way you redirect yourself from an awkward conversation without appearing to flee. He simply stayed where he was. I don't think we've met, he said. Clara looked at him for a moment. I know who you are, sir. Then you have the advantage of me. Something in his expression shifted, not quite a smile, but the territory adjacent to one. Patient, waiting, Clara Bellamy. I work for Mrs. Hutchins at the boarding house. Bellamy. He set the name down as though placing something carefully on a shelf. You're from here originally? Funny. I grew up on the ranch. I don't recall seeing you before. I make a point of not being seen, she said, and immediately recognized the mistake. It was too honest, too wry, entirely not the register she used with men like him. And she was already beginning the internal correction, the smoothing back, the reassembling of the appropriate distance. He laughed. It was short and completely unguarded, the kind of laugh that gets out before a person decides whether it's appropriate. It changed his face entirely, and for one undefended moment he looked less like Willow Creek's most eligible rancher and more like someone who had just said something he'd been thinking for a while. "That's a skill," he said. "I'd pay money for it some evenings." "I imagine you would," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes stayed on her face with an attention that was beginning to feel less like accident and more like intention. Somewhere across the room a man called his name, and the moment broke. He turned, acknowledged it with a brief lift of his hand, and looked back at her. "Excuse me, Miss Bellamy," he said, and tipped his head in a way that was more genuine than formal. He walked away. Clara stood at the table for a count of 5. Then she picked up the pitcher and told herself, with great firmness, that it had been nothing. He was a polite man. Polite men occasionally spoke to people below their station. In the morning he would not remember her name, and she would not embarrass herself by remembering the conversation as anything other than what it was, a brief exchange with a courteous stranger who had already returned to the world he actually lived in. She was very practiced at this particular kind of reasoning. She went back to work. The musicians shifted to proper dance pieces just before 9. Clara had positioned herself at the edge of the hall, near the kitchen corridor, where she could watch the tables without being in anyone's path. The floor filled with couples. The room brightened with the specific energy of people who had been anticipating movement all evening and were finally allowed it. Nathaniel was not dancing. She noticed this the way she noticed everything about him, without intending to, without being able to stop. He stood near the far wall with a small group of men, his weight shifted slightly to one side, answering what was being said to him with the patient efficiency of a man fulfilling an obligation. He was not present, not in any real sense. He was there the way people are there when they are waiting for the evening to mean something and it has not yet decided to. Pearl Whitmore drifted past his group twice. The second time she laughed at something and turned the laugh toward him like an offering. He did not receive it. Clara looked away. She was smoothing the linen on the near table when the sound of the room changed, not in volume, but in texture, the way a room changes when collective attention redirects. She felt it before she understood it, that particular weight of being watched that presses differently on the skin than ordinary air. She looked up. Nathaniel Carter was walking toward her. Not toward the table, not toward the kitchen, toward her specifically, with the purposeful straightness of a man who had made a decision and was done deliberating about it. He crossed the room without looking at Pearl Whitmore. He passed within 3 feet of Josephine Aldrich without breaking stride. He passed the cluster of women who had been constructing reasons to stand near him all evening, and he did not slow down for any of them. He stopped in front of Clara. The room noticed. She could feel the noticing, that sudden contraction of ambient sound that happens when 50 people simultaneously decide to pay attention to the same thing. "Miss Bellamy," he said. His voice was exactly as quiet as it had been across the serving table. He was not projecting for the room. He was speaking to her. "I would be honored to have my first dance with you tonight." Clara's hands went still on the tablecloth. She looked at him. She looked at his extended hand. She looked at the room behind him, at Pearl Whitmore's expression, which had gone carefully, dangerously blank. At Helen Beaumont's mother, whose face had arranged itself into the specific shape of a woman witnessing something she intends to discuss thoroughly later. "Sir," she said very quietly, "I'm working, I can see that." He did not lower his hand. "I'm asking anyway. People are watching us. I know they are. They'll talk about this for a month. Probably longer," he said without flinching. "I find that bothers me considerably less than the thought of the music ending and you still standing here alone." Something hit the back of her throat, not tears. She would not allow tears, but the pressure of something that had been held too tightly for too long, meeting an unexpected exit. "Mr. Carter." She kept her voice steady. She was very good at steady. "I am a maid. I fill water glasses and collect empty plates, and I go home and I do it again the next day. I am not the kind of woman that men like you dance with." "You're the kind of woman I want to dance with," he said. "That's the only kind that matters to me." The music was already playing. The floor was full of couples who were not paying attention to the music anymore. "One dance," she said. She meant it to sound cautious. A concession under pressure. A practical concession she would correct the moment it was over. But her hand was already moving toward his. And when his fingers closed around hers, steady, unhurried, carrying the calluses of a working man, the part of Clara Bellamy that had been braced against the world for 26 years, felt something shift deep in her chest. Quiet, irreversible, like the first thaw crack running through winter ice. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at him. Nathaniel Carter led the woman nobody saw to the center of the floor, while every person in Willow Creek held their breath. The dance lasted 4 minutes. Clara counted everyone. She was not a trained dancer. Her body was large and heavy, built for the kind of work that exhausted the bones, and she had spent no hours of her life learning the social graces that would have made this moment elegant. She had expected to feel ashamed, to feel the full cruelty of every eye in the room, measuring how wrong she looked his position in this space, with this man. She did not feel ashamed. She could not fully account for why. Nathaniel danced the way he did everything else without performance. He matched her pace without making her aware he was doing it. His frame was solid enough that she could find her own balance inside it without clutching. He did not look over her shoulder at the crowd gauging its reaction. He did not look below her chin in the way men sometimes looked at women whose bodies they were assessing. He looked at her face, consistently, with the same unhurried attention he had brought to every exchange they'd had that evening. "You're doing fine," he said halfway through. "I've never done this before." "Not like this. In front of people," she said. "In a room where people are watching. They're going to watch regardless," he said. "Might as well give them something worth looking at." She almost laughed. The sound surprised her, short, involuntary, escaping before she could decide whether to let it. He noticed. Something in his expression settled, like a door finding its frame. "Who taught you to disappear like that?" he asked quietly. "That kind of invisible takes practice. You learn it," she said, "when people make clear they'd rather you weren't there." His jaw tightened, barely perceptibly. "Who made it clear?" "Everyone," she said, "at some point or another." He was quiet for 3 full beats of the music. "People see the first thing and call it the whole story," he said. "Most of them never look long enough to find out if they're right. Most people don't have a reason to look longer. I had a reason," he said, "the first moment I saw you." The music was ending. She could hear it in the way the phrase began resolving, the fiddle finding its way down from the peak of the melody. She had maybe 10 seconds left inside this strange, impossible 4 minutes, after which it would become something that had happened, something to file away carefully in the part of her memory where she kept everything she could not have. "What reason?" she asked. The music stopped. His hand stayed at her waist for exactly 1 breath. "You were the only person in this room," he said, "who wasn't performing." He released her. She stepped back, and Clara Bellamy, who had spent 26 years learning to be nothing, to take up no space, to require nothing from the world, and expect even less, stood at the center of the Dawson family's ballroom, while every person in Willow Creek looked at her. Really looked. For the first time, she did not know what to do with that. She turned. She walked back to the side table. She picked up the pitcher with hands that were only slightly unsteady. Behind her, she heard the room exhale, and underneath that exhale, rising through the fresh rush of whispers, like something surfacing from deep water, she heard her own name spoken by strangers, spoken with surprise. spoken in tones ranging from confusion to outrage to the kind of grudging fascination that precedes a long reconsideration. She kept moving, she kept working. She did not allow herself to look back at where he stood. The rest of the evening came apart into pieces she could not properly order later. She remembered Pearl Whitmore's face, the particular blankness of a beautiful woman caught completely off guard, the performance momentarily down, the real expression underneath it not pretty at all. She remembered Josephine Aldrich pressing 2 fingers to her lips and leaning toward her companion with the focused attention of someone storing ammunition. She remembered the musicians beginning the next piece after a pause that lasted perhaps 3 seconds longer than it should have. She remembered Mrs. Hutchins appearing at her elbow with a look that contained no judgment but a very great deal of awareness, saying simply, "Finish your work." Clara, in the voice of a woman who understood exactly what had just happened and had chosen for now to table it. Clara finished her work. At some point, carrying empty glasses through the side corridor, she passed the clothes-puller door and heard 2 women's voices through the thin wall. She recognized one immediately, Helen Beaumont's mother, Margaret Beaumont, a woman who had spent 30 years building and managing social consequence in Willow Creek and had never once underestimated her own importance to the process. "Did you see it?" It was not a question, I saw it. The second voice was unfamiliar. Tighter. Younger. He walked straight past Pearl Whitmore. Margaret Beaumont said this the way you state a crime. He walked past every decent family in that room, and he danced with the Hutchins maid. That heavy girl who was carrying the water. What could he possibly? I don't know what he thinks he's doing. The voice dropped, sharpened. But I will tell you this. His father is going to hear about this before Sunday. William Carter did not build that ranch so his son could throw himself away on a hired woman with no family and no prospects and no. Clara kept walking. She had learned long ago that the cruelest words lost their edge if you refused to stop moving when you heard them. You kept your feet going, and you let the sounds fall behind you like shed water. You did not let them catch. She did not let them catch. She helped Mrs. Hutchins close the tables, stack the linens, and return the pitchers to the kitchen. She dried her hands. She tied her cloak. She walked out into the warm July night through the back entrance the way she had come in. She was a full block down the road when she heard footsteps. Not hurrying, not closing on her with urgency, simply present behind her at her same pace. She kept walking. "Miss Bellamy," she stopped. She turned. Nathaniel Carter stood 10 feet back on the dark road. His jacket was over one arm. The good jacket, the slightly unfamiliar one. He had the look of a man who had said good evening to everyone he needed to say it to, and had then left through a door they were not expecting. "You don't need to follow me home," she said. "I'm not following you." A pause. "I'm walking in the same direction. You live north of town." "I do." He held her look without apology. "I wanted to ask you something before the evening ended." Clara stood in the road with the July warmth around her and the stars unhelpfully silent overhead. She looked at the man who had just rearranged every assumption she had built her evening on. "Ask it," she said. "Would you allow me to call on you?" he said. "Properly. Not across a serving table. Not on a dance floor in front of people who are watching for the wrong reasons. Properly." She was quiet, a long quiet, the kind she used when she needed to be sure her voice would come out level. "Mr. Carter," she said at last, "I think you are an honest man. I think you mean exactly what you say. I also think you have no idea what you're proposing in terms of what this county will do with it. Your father's business relationships. You're standing among every family who is in that room tonight. The stories that will be told about you from now until—" "I have some idea," he said. "Then you know it isn't sensible." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He took 3 steps closer and stopped at a distance that was respectful and deliberate. "Bellamy, I have spent the last 10 years watching careful men make comfortable decisions and end up hollowed out by 50. I'm not interested in comfortable." His voice was quiet, plain, carrying no drama whatsoever. "I'm interested in real. I spent 4 minutes dancing with you, and it was the most honest conversation I've had in 3 years. I'd like more of that if you're willing. She looked at him for a long time. I don't have anything to give a man like you, she said. Not bitterness, plain truth. I'm not asking for anything to be given, he said. I'm asking for Sunday afternoon if Mrs. Hutchins can spare you. The road was still. The stars maintained their silence. Clara Bellamy, who had been told by the world in 1,000 different ways what she was and wasn't worth, stood in the warm dark and felt the careful structure of her self-protection creak at something it had not been built to withstand, not cruelty, which it handled perfectly well, but this. Patience, directness. A man looking at her on purpose and staying. Sunday, she said, and nodded once, slow and settled, like a man marking something in a place he will not lose it. Sunday, he said. He turned north. She turned toward home. She walked the rest of the way without looking back, but for the first time in longer than she could name, she was not walking away from something. She was walking toward it, and she did not yet know what it was. In the morning, the talk had already made 2 full circles. Clara arrived at the boarding house kitchen before 6 and found it in the particular quality of silence that exists in a place where everyone is pretending not to be thinking about the same thing. Mrs. Hutchins poured her coffee and said nothing. 2 of the other boarders spoke past her at breakfast, with the careful precision of people navigating around something they had been told not to mention but could not stop thinking about. Clara made the biscuits. She swept the floor. She went to the dry goods store before 9 for the week's supplies, and Mrs. Pollard, who had never in Clara's memory initiated a personal conversation with her, leaned forward over the counter with an expression calibrated to look like concern. "Clara, dear," she said, in the voice of a woman who has decided she is doing a kindness. "I just want someone to say this to you, since I'm not sure anyone else will. Men like Nathaniel Carter, when they're at loose ends, when they're bored with the ordinary, sometimes they do things. They dance with unexpected women, they say flattering things. And then the season turns, and they remember where they belong, and the woman who believed them is left looking. 2 pounds of flour," Clara said pleasantly, "and a 1/4 pound of coffee." Mrs. Pollard blinked. Clara waited. She received her flour and her coffee, and she walked out into the sunshine and did not allow her hands to shake until she was around the corner and out of sight. On the street she passed Josephine Aldrich's mother, who looked at her without speaking, but looked at her in a way that conducted a slow, comprehensive inventory every excess of her body, every deficit of her dress with the thoroughness of a woman building a case. Clara had been inventoried before. She had been found wanting before. She walked through it and kept going. Back at the boarding house, she made the beds in 3 of the upstairs rooms, scrubbed the hallway floor, and carried a basket of laundry to the yard. She worked steadily and did not allow herself to think about Sunday. She did not allow herself to construct the conversation, or anticipate his voice, or imagine any version of the afternoon that was not followed immediately by the version where it came to nothing. She had a system. The system was, do not want it before you know if you can have it, because the wanting costs more than you can afford. She was inside this system, pulling sheets from the line when Mrs. Hutchins came to the back door. "Something came for you," she said. Clara turned. Mrs. Hutchins was holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. She crossed the yard, handed it over without ceremony, and went back inside. Clara stood in the sun with clean sheets folded over her arm and looked at the package. She opened it. Inside was a small glass jar of honey, local honey, pale amber, dense and clear, and a note folded once. The handwriting was plain and unhurried. "Heard the boarding house kitchen makes excellent biscuits. Thought this might be useful come Sunday. N. Carter." Clara stood in the yard for a long time. The sheets were clean and warm from the sun. The honey caught the light and held it. Somewhere down the road, a horse moved past at a slow walk, and the sound of it faded, and then there was just the yard and the warmth and the small, amber jar in her hands. She had a system. The system was do not want it. She carried the jar inside. She set it on the kitchen windowsill, where the afternoon light fell longest. And she stood there and looked at it, and for exactly 1 full minute she let herself feel it, the whole weight of it, the dangerous, inconvenient, 26 years in the making feeling of being seen by someone who was looking on purpose and had not yet looked away. 1 minute. Then she went back to work, but she left the honey in the light. Sunday came the way good things always came to Clara Bellamy, quietly, without fanfare, with the particular quality of something she had been telling herself not to want. She was up before 5, the way she always was. She made the boarders' breakfast, washed the dishes, swept the kitchen floor twice because it did not need it the second time, but her hands needed somewhere to be. Mrs. Hutchins watched her from the doorway, with the expression of a woman who had seen a great deal of human behavior and had developed the wisdom not to comment on most of it. "You're off at noon," Mrs. Hutchins said finally. "Same as every Sunday." "Yes, ma'am. And if anyone comes to the door asking for you..."
A pause, deliberate and weighted.
"I'll tell them you're available." Clara looked up from the sink. Mrs. Hutchins had already turned back into the dining room. Clara stood at the sink with her wet hands and her heart doing something undignified in her chest, and she told herself, for what felt like the 40th time since Friday morning, that it would probably come to nothing. He had been caught up in an evening's emotion. He had done a dramatic thing and perhaps regretted it. The honey had been a polite gesture, not a commitment. Men like Nathaniel Carter did not reorganize their lives around Sunday afternoons with boarding house maids. She told herself all of this. Then she went upstairs and changed into the blue dress. He arrived at 12:15. She heard his horse before she saw him, a distinctive, unhurried rhythm of hooves on the packed road outside that stopped directly in front of the boarding house. She was in the kitchen, pretending to check on a pot that required no checking, and she made herself count to 10 before she moved. When she stepped out onto the front porch, he was already at the bottom of the steps. He had not dressed in his good jacket. He wore plain working clothes, canvas trousers, a clean shirt the color of summer sky, his hat in one hand. He looked exactly like himself, which was somehow more alarming than formality would have been, because formality at least provided structure, and Clara had no idea what structure applied to this. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "Mr. Carter, I brought something." He held out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "My cook makes these on Saturday mornings. They keep well." She unwrapped the corner, oat cakes, still fragrant. "Thank you," she said, and her voice came out entirely normal, which she considered a personal achievement. "There's a path along the creek east of town," he said. "Good walking if you're interested. Or we can sit on the porch if you'd rather stay close." Behind her, through the boarding house window, she was absolutely certain that Mrs. Pollard, who boarded on the second floor and had no business being in the front parlor on a Sunday, was watching. "The creek path," Clara said. They walked side by side down the main road, and neither of them spoke for the first 2 minutes, which should have been uncomfortable, and somehow was not. It was the particular ease of two people who had already said something true to each other and did not feel the need to fill the space with noise while they found their footing. It was Nathaniel who broke it first. "How bad was it?" he asked. After the other night, Clara considered pretending not to understand the question. She discarded the idea. "Mrs. Pollard told me men like you dance with unexpected women when you're bored and then remember where you belong when the season turns." He was quiet a moment. "She said that to you directly?" Over the flower counter, she framed it as concern. "I'm sorry. Don't be, I've heard worse." She glanced at him. "How bad was it for you?" His mouth went slightly to one side. "My father's foreman told me at breakfast Saturday that I had caused a disturbance." Those were the exact words. "Like I'd knocked over a fence." "Had you probably." He didn't sound bothered by it. "My father wants to meet with me Monday morning. That conversation is going to be a different kind of fence." Something cold moved through Clara's chest. "What will you tell him?" "The truth," he said. "That I danced with a woman I wanted to dance with, then I'd do it again." She stopped walking. He went 2 steps further before he noticed and turned. "What?" he said. "You have to understand something." She kept her voice level. This was important. She needed to say it plainly, without drama, without the wobble that was threatening the back of her throat. "I'm not a woman men fight their fathers over. I'm not a woman who inspires that kind of decision. I'm a maid, Mr. Carter. I have $12 saved, and a blue dress I've mended 4 times, and a reputation in this town that was already difficult before Friday night. If your father tells you to end this before it begins, I will not think less of you for listening to him." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. "Are you finished?" he said. She blinked. Because I'd like to respond if you're finished." She closed her mouth. "My father," he said slowly, "is a good man who built something extraordinary from nothing and loves his family and is also, on the specific subject of what other people think, consistently wrong. I've watched him make 3 decisions in the past 10 years based on county opinion rather than his own judgment, and all 3 of them cost him something he could not get back." He stepped closer. Not crowding her, just closing the distance to the point where she had to work to pretend it wasn't there. "I'm not going to make those decisions. You don't know me," she said. "I know enough to want to know more. 1 dance and 1 Sunday afternoon. And a conversation over a serving table that was more honest than anything I've heard in the past year combined." He held her look. "I'm a patient man, Miss Bellamy. I'm not proposing anything except Sunday afternoons if you'll have them. I'm not asking you to reorganize your life around mine. I'm asking you to walk along this creek with me and eat my cook's oatcakes and talk to me like you talked to me the other night." A pause. "Can you do that?" Clara looked at him. She looked at the creek path ahead, the shadows of the cottonwoods across the water, the afternoon quiet of a town that was probably discussing them right now in 6 different living rooms. "I can do that," she said. They walked for 2 hours. She learned things. He had 2 younger sisters, both married, one in Billings and one in Helena. He had taken over the ranch at 24 when his father's back gave out, and managed for 18 months before William Carter recovered enough to resume working alongside him. He had never wanted to be the richest man in the county. He had wanted, and here he said it without embarrassment, which she found disorienting, to be the kind of man his grandfather was. A man people came to when they were in trouble. Were they? She asked. Did people come to him? Constantly. Our kitchen table looked like a courthouse some weeks. He glanced at her sideways. What about you? You said you were born here. Where's your family? The question landed the way it always did, not with cruelty, but with the particular weight of an absence she had learned to carry, so constantly she sometimes forgot it was heavy. My mother died when I was 11, she said. Fever. My father left the following spring. I don't know where he went. She kept her voice even. She had told this story enough times that she knew which words to use to keep it from opening up into something she could not manage in public. Mrs. Hutchins took me on when I was 15. She didn't have to. But she did. She did. He was quiet. Not with pity. She was watching for pity, the way you watch for a particular weather sign, ready to redirect the conversation the moment it appeared. It did not appear. His silence was something different. Dear, you've been carrying your own weight since you were 11 years old, he said. Most people have something like that. No, he said. They don't. She did not answer. They walked another 50 yards before she said, Why did you really cross that room at the Dawson party? You had 20 women waiting and you walked past all of them. He thought about it. She appreciated that he thought about it, rather than reaching for something quick. I watched you for about 2 hours before I moved, he said. You want to know what I noticed? I want to know what you noticed. You looked at every person in that room, he said. Not to be seen, not to see who was looking back. You looked at people because you were curious about them. Because they interested you on their own merits, with nothing coming back to you. He looked at the creek, then back at her. I haven't seen many people do that. Most people in rooms like that are only looking to check how they're landing. You weren't landing anywhere, and you were still looking a beat. That's not nothing, Miss Bellamy. Clara felt something move through her chest that she did not have a word for. "That's a generous way of describing someone doing their job," she said. "Maybe," he almost smiled. "Or maybe I'm right." They turned back toward town. The walk home was easier. Something had shifted somewhere in the middle of it, some unspoken renegotiation of the distance between them, not closed but altered. When they reached the boarding house steps, he stopped, as she had known he would, at the appropriate distance. "Next Sunday," he said. She looked at him. "Next Sunday," she said. He nodded, put his hat on, walked back to his horse. With the same unhurried stride he did everything in. And she stood on the porch and watched him ride north and told herself very firmly that she was not watching him ride away. She went inside. Mrs. Hutchins was in the kitchen, pointedly and implausibly reorganizing a shelf of jars that had been perfectly organized for 3 years. "Nice walk," she said to the jars. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed both hands flat against her knees and breathed. She had a system. The system was, do not want it. The system she was beginning to understand was in serious trouble. Monday morning arrived with the force of a door thrown open. Clara was in the kitchen at 5:30 when she heard the horses outside, not one but two, and moving with the particular authority of people who had a destination and did not intend to be delayed. She went to the window. 2 men she didn't recognize were dismounting in front of the boarding house, and behind them, stepping down from a dark bay horse with the careful movements of someone whose back had given him trouble more than once, was a man who wore Nathaniel Carter's jaw and William Carter's years. She stepped back from the window. A knock at the boarding house door. She heard Mrs. Hutchins cross the front room and open it, heard the low exchange of voices, heard Mrs. Hutchins say, without any particular emotion, "I'll see if she's available." Footsteps in the hall. Mrs. Hutchins appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face was composed in the specific way it composed itself when she was thinking several things simultaneously and had decided to express none of them. "William Carter would like a word," she said, in the front parlor. Clara set down the bread knife. She untied her apron. She walked to the front parlor. William Carter was standing in the middle of the room. He was a broad man, not as tall as Nathaniel, but carrying the same quality of settled, physical presence, the look of someone who had worked the same land for 30 years and had the permanence of it in him. He was not unkind-looking. He was also clearly not there to be unkind. He was there to be certain. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "Mr. Carter." She stood straight. She had nothing to fidget with since she'd left the apron in the kitchen, which had been the right decision. He studied for a moment the way people study something they've been told to look at carefully. Then he said, "My son came home Sunday evening and told me he'd spent the afternoon with you." "Yes, sir. He also told me he intends to continue doing so." "Yes, sir. And you have no objection." "I have several objections," she said. "I expressed them to him on Sunday. He found them unpersuasive." Something moved in William Carter's face, not amusement, not yet, but the territory adjacent to surprise. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "I'd prefer it." He looked at her steadily. "My son is one of the most eligible men in this county. He has responsibilities to this ranch, to our family's standing, to relationships I've spent 30 years building. The woman he marries will be part of all of that. She will be received in certain homes and excluded from others, and her background will be discussed and evaluated, and compared against expectations that I did not invent but have to live inside of." He paused. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "You're telling me," Clara said, "that I'm not suitable. I'm telling you that this county will tell you that, loudly and persistently, and I want to know if you're the kind of woman who falls apart under that kind of pressure." Clara looked at him. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I have been unsuitable my entire life. People in this town have been telling me what I am and am not since I was 12 years old. I have been doing this job since I was 15 and I have never once fallen apart. Not publicly." A pause, sir. William Carter said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down, Miss Bellamy." She sat. He sat across from her and some of the formality went out of his posture. Not completely, but enough. Nathaniel is stubborn, he said. He gets that from his mother. When she decided something, a team of horses couldn't move her a beat. I need to know your intentions. With respect, she said carefully. We have had one Sunday afternoon and one dance. I don't believe either of us has intentions beyond next Sunday. Nathaniel does. Something moved through her. How do you know? She asked, and her voice was not entirely steady. Because he told me yesterday morning before breakfast, William Carter said, that he had met someone he intended to know for the rest of his life, and that if the county had objections, it would have to develop a way of living with them. He looked at her. He's never said anything like that in 30 years. The room was very quiet. Clara pressed her palms against her knees. I don't know what to tell you, Mr. Carter, she said. I think your son is. I think he is a good man, an honest one. And I think you raised him that way. But I'm not trying to take anything from your family. I'm not trying to attach myself to his name or his land or anything that belongs to your family. I work for my own living and I intend to go on doing so. That's not what I'm worried about, William Carter said. Then what are you worried about? He looked at his hands for a moment. Then at her. I'm worried, he said, that my son is going to commit himself to something this county will punish him for, and that the punishment will come sideways, through you. Through the way people will treat you. And I need to know whether you can survive that. Because Nathaniel will survive it, he's too stubborn not to. But the people who love stubborn men often pay the price that the stubborn men don't. Clara sat with that. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to her in months. I don't know, she said, finally. I know what I've survived so far. I don't know what else is coming. William Carter nodded, once slowly. He stood. You're more direct than I expected, he said. People usually expect less, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something shifted behind his eyes, not warmth, not yet, but the beginning of a recalculation. Good morning, Miss Bellamy, he said. Good morning, sir. He walked out. Clara sat in the parlor for 3 full minutes without moving. Then she went back to the kitchen, tied on her apron, and picked up the bread knife. Her hands were perfectly steady. She had survived 12 years old without a mother, 15 without a father, 26 without anyone looking at her the way Nathaniel Carter looked at her, which had turned out to be the hardest absence of all, because you could not miss something precisely until you had seen what it looked like. She could survive William Carter. She could survive the county. The only question, the one she refused to examine directly, the one she kept at the edge of her vision, use a bright light to avoid being blinded, was whether surviving it would cost her something she had only just discovered she wanted. By Wednesday, Clara had been talked about in every establishment on the main road. She knew this because the town of Willow Creek was not subtle, and because the specific quality of silence that fell when she entered a room had upgraded itself from the ordinary silence of invisibility to the charged silence of a woman being actively discussed the moment she left. She went about her work. She made the beds and swept the floors and carried the laundry and cooked the meals. She went to the dry goods store and the butcher, the post office, and at each location she received some variation of the same experience, eyes sliding to her and away, conversations that ended or lowered just slightly. The particular architecture of a community managing information it has not yet decided what to do with. On Wednesday afternoon, she was coming back from the butcher with a wrapped package under her arm when she turned the corner onto Birch Street and walked directly into Margaret Beaumont. Not almost directly, close enough that Clara had to step back to avoid collision. Margaret Beaumont was a tall woman, narrow in the shoulders, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and had since settled into the harder geometry of long-held judgments. She looked at Clara the way a person looks at something they have specifically come out to find. Miss Bellamy, she said. Mrs. Beaumont. Clara shifted the package under her arm. She did not step aside. She had learned, somewhere around age 14, that the habit of making room for people who wished her smaller was one she could not afford to maintain. "I won't waste your time," Margaret Beaumont said. "You seem like a practical woman." "Thank you. I mean it as a compliment. Practical women understand how the world works. They don't spend time on arrangements that cannot succeed." She paused. "Precisely. What Nathaniel Carter is doing is not cruelty. I want you to understand that. He's a young man who is distracted. It happens. The solution is not to encourage it." "I see," Clara said. "You must understand how this ends. A man in his position with his responsibilities, whatever he feels right now, the county will correct it. Society corrects these things. It always does. And when it corrects itself, you'll be the one left explaining yourself." Her voice was almost gentle. "Almost. Let it go now, before it costs you something you can't recover." Clara looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said, "I appreciate your concern, I do. But I've been explaining myself to this county since I was 12 years old, and I find I'm getting better at it rather than worse." She held the woman's gaze. "Have a good afternoon," she walked on. She made it to the end of the block before her knees registered what the rest of her had been refusing to admit, which was that her heart was going at approximately twice its ordinary rate, and her hands had gone cold inside the warm July air. But she had not stepped aside, she had not apologized. She had not let it catch her. She did not tell Nathaniel about Margaret Beaumont on Sunday. She intended to. She had the words arranged and ready. But when he arrived again without the good jacket, again entirely himself, and they fell back into the particular rhythm that had established itself the previous week, the arrangement dissolved. There was too much else to say. He told her about the ranch's water problem, an upstream landowner named Gideon Marsh, who had spent the past 2 months restricting the creek flow through his property, slowly, in ways that were technically legal and practically devastating for the cattle on the Carter Ranch's south pasture. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "Since March." He started small, easy to argue it was seasonal. By May it was deliberate. His jaw set in a way she was beginning to recognize as his particular form of controlled anger. "He wants the south parcel. He's made 2 offers. Both times my father said no. So now he's squeezing. Do you have the water rights documented?" He looked at her. She stopped. "I'm sorry. That's not, no." He leaned forward slightly. "Do I have them documented?" "My father kept records before he left," she said carefully. "I helped him file things at the county office when I was young. I know how those claims work. If you have a prior claim, a filed claim that predates Marsh's land purchase, he can't legally restrict your access regardless of what he does upstream." Nathaniel was very still. "My father filed a water claim in 1861, he said. "When he first settled the land. Is it registered with the county?" "I believe so. I've never had reason to look at it." "Look at it," she said. "Tomorrow morning, before you do anything else." He stared at her. Then something moved across his face, not surprise exactly, but a shift in understanding, a recalibration of what he was looking at. "How do you know about water claims?" he said. "I told you. My father kept records. I was a practical 11-year-old with nothing else to do." A beat. Then he smiled, not the almost smile she had been seeing, but the real one, the one she suspected he did not produce on command. It went all the way to his eyes, and it changed everything in his face, and she felt it land in her chest like something irreversible. "Clara," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, and neither of them remarked on it, which made it more. "Nathaniel," she said. And they sat there in the Sunday afternoon, with the name between them and the creek moving somewhere nearby, and everything that had not yet been said, gathering around the edges of the conversation like weather building at the horizon. He found the water claim on Tuesday. She knew this because he came to the boarding house that afternoon, not on Sunday, not at an arranged time, but at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday in his working clothes, with his hat pushed back and his eyes carrying the bright, focused quality of someone who had discovered something important. Mrs. Hutchins let him in without a word and came to the kitchen where Clara was peeling potatoes. "Company," she said, "to the wall," and walked back out. Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. "It's there," he said. Filed September 4th, 1861, prior to Marsh's land purchase by 11 years. It covers every tributary on the south pasture down to the creek fork. He said it like a man setting down something heavy he had been carrying in the wrong way. He has no legal standing, none. Clara set down the potato and the knife. "What will you do?" "File a formal complaint with the county water office. Get a surveyor to document the current restriction. And then," he paused, "and then I'm going to sit across from Gideon Marsh and explain to him, very calmly, that his next move needs to be backward. Will he cooperate? Not at first." The brightness in his eyes settled into something steadier. "But he will." Clara looked at him standing in Mrs. Hutchins's kitchen doorway in his working clothes, animated, alive, carrying a kind of purpose that she had not seen on him in the more formal settings where she had previously observed him. He was entirely himself, the way he was always entirely himself, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to look at him and maintain the useful fiction that this was temporary. "Clara." He said her name the same way he had said it Sunday, like it belonged to him a little, like he had earned a small portion of it. "Thank you. I didn't do anything, I just asked a question." "You asked the right one." He looked at her steadily. "You do that a great deal." She did not know what to say. She picked up the potato. "Go file your complaint," she said. He almost smiled. "Almost yes, ma'am," he said. He left. Mrs. Hutchins materialized in the doorway 30 seconds later, with the expression of a woman who had heard every word of that exchange and had formed comprehensive opinions she was exercising considerable restraint in not sharing. "Nice young man," she said to no one in particular. Clara peeled the potato, but she was already thinking about Sunday. And for the first time in 26 years, the week between Sundays felt like something she was moving through on purpose rather than simply surviving. The water complaint filed on Wednesday. By Friday, Gideon Marsh knew about it. Clara found out the way she found out most things in Willow Creek, through the walls of the boarding house dining room, where sound traveled with the reliability of a telegraph wire and the discretion of none. She was clearing the breakfast table when she heard two of the male boarders discussing it in the low, interested tones of men who had no stake in something but found it entertaining regardless. "Marsh is furious," one of them said. "Went to see Carter Sr. yesterday afternoon. Came out of that meeting looking like he'd bitten into something rotten. Carter have the rights? Filed clean in 61. Marsh's lawyer already confirmed it. There's nothing to contest." A pause, the sound of coffee being poured. "Word is Marsh is making noise about other things now. Saying Carter's been running cattle across his eastern boundary without permission. Saying he's got witnesses. Does he? Does it matter? Man like Marsh, he doesn't need facts. He needs noise." Clara stacked the plates and carried them to the kitchen and stood at the sink, thinking about what noise cost, and who paid for it, and whether a water claim filed in 1861 was strong enough to hold against a man who had decided to stop being subtle. She found out on Saturday that it was not going to be that simple. Nathaniel came to the boarding house mid-morning, not his usual time, and the fact of the irregular visit registered before she even saw his face. When she did see it, she understood immediately that something had moved in the wrong direction. She came out to the front porch, and he was standing at the bottom of the steps with his hat in both hands, turning it slowly, which was the first time she had seen him do anything with his hands that looked like agitation. "Tell me," she said. "Marsh went to the county commissioner yesterday evening," he said. "Not about the water claim, that's solid, he can't touch it. He went about the eastern boundary. He's filed a formal trespass complaint against the Carter Ranch. Says our cattle have been crossing his fence line since spring." "Have they?" "No. Flat and certain, our eastern fence has been maintained continuously. I checked it myself 2 weeks ago, then he's lying." He's lying with 2 signed affidavits and the ear of Commissioner Holt, who had dinner at the Marsh house 4 times in the past year. He looked at her directly. Holt has the authority to suspend our grazing permits on the disputed sections while the complaint is under investigation. If he does that, you're summer grazing, she said. 300 head need those pastures through September. If we lose access for the investigation period, we lose the weight gain on the fall cattle. We lose the contracts. Clara sat down on the top porch step without meaning to. The full shape of it came clear at once, not a frontal assault, because Marsh was not stupid. A slow collapse. Undercut the water. File a false complaint. Pressure the permits. Cost the Carters enough money in one season that the South parcel sale stopped looking like a choice and started looking like a necessity. He's not trying to win a fight, she said. He's trying to make you too tired to have one. Nathaniel stopped turning his hat. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just heard the thing he was already thinking, stated more precisely than he had stated it to himself. Yes, he said. What does your father say? My father says we fight it through the county process and we wait. His jaw tightened. He's not wrong. But the county process takes time we may not have if Holt moves on the permits quickly. When does Holt decide? He's called a meeting Wednesday next week. Public record, anyone can attend. Clara looked at the road. I'll be there, she said. Clara, I know the county records process, she said. I know how the filing system works because I spent 2 years helping my father understand it. If Marsh's affidavits have procedural problems, wrong dates, mismatched property descriptions, any error at all, they can be challenged before Holt makes a ruling. She looked up at him. Let me look at the filed complaint before Wednesday. I want to read what Marsh actually submitted. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Those aren't public documents until after a ruling, he said. No, she agreed. But they're kept in the county clerk's office, and Ellen Marsh, who files for the clerk's office, came through this boarding house for 2 years before she married, and she has a memory for kindness. She paused. Let me try. He looked at her for a long moment, not with doubt, but with something that was becoming a familiar weight to her, a steady, accumulating regard that felt less and less like admiration, and more like the way someone looks at a person they are starting to count on. Be careful, he said. I'm always careful, she said. I've had practice. He almost smiled. She went to see Ellen Marsh on Monday morning. Ellen's married name was Purdy now, and she worked Tuesday through Friday at the clerk's office in the county building at the end of Main Street. But on Monday mornings, she could be found at the milliner's shop on the east end of town, where she spent approximately 1 hour looking at hats she could not quite afford, and approximately 20 minutes actually purchasing thread and ribbon for perfectly practical purposes. Clara found her at the ribbon counter. Clara Bellamy. Ellen Purdy turned with the particular brightness of a woman who has genuinely fond memories of a time. It's been an age. You look well, you too. Clara kept her voice light and easy, the tone of 2 women meeting accidentally over ribbon. How's married life treating you? Wonderfully, mostly. Ellen's eyes carried the small flicker that accompanies mostly whenever it is honest. Robert works hard, we manage. I'm glad. Clara picked up a spool of blue thread and turned it in her hands, not because she needed it. Ellen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand I'm asking as someone who remembers who was kind to me when most people weren't. Ellen's expression shifted, still friendly, but watchful now. Smart woman, what is it? She said quietly. The Marsh trespass filing against the Carter ranch. I need to know if there are errors in the submitted affidavits. Not the content, just procedural. Dates, property notations, witness qualifications. A long beat. Clara, those documents, I know what they are. I'm not asking you to remove them or alter them or do anything that puts your position at risk. I'm asking you to tell me from memory whether what Marsh submitted was clean. She held Ellen's gaze. Because if it wasn't, a family that hasn't done a single thing wrong is about to lose their summer grazing on the word of a man who is squeezing them because they won't sell land they don't want to sell. Ellen looked at the ribbon counter. She looked at the blue thread in Clara's hands. She was quiet for long enough that Clara thought she had miscalculated, that the ask had been too much, that she had used up the kindness credit in a single morning and come away with nothing. Then Ellen said, very quietly, to the ribbon, the second affidavit. The witness listed is a Jacob Finney. He's listed as residing at the Marsh property on the date of the alleged incident. And Clara kept her voice level. And Jacob Finney moved to Billings in April. His residence notation is wrong. Another beat. If someone filed a formal objection to the witness qualification before Wednesday's meeting, Holt would have to consider whether the second affidavit stands. Clara set down the thread. Thank you, Ellen, she said. Ellen Purdy straightened the ribbon she had not been straightening and said, to no one specifically, I didn't tell you anything. No, Clara agreed, you didn't. She walked out of the milliner's shop into the July heat and moved down the street at the same pace she always moved, unhurried, ordinary. Entirely invisible to the three people she passed who did not bother to look at her. And she thought about Jacob Finney in Billings, and a wrongly notated residence, and the specific narrow weight of a procedural error in a county document. And she thought that sometimes the difference between a man keeping what was his and losing it came down to something as small as an address written on the wrong line. She went directly to the Carter ranch. She had never been there before. She had known its location the way she knew most things through accumulated information rather than direct experience, and she went on foot because it was only 2 miles north of town, and she needed the walk to think. The foreman met her at the gate with the expression of a man who was not expecting a boarding house maid and was not certain what the protocol was for one. I need to speak with Nathaniel Carter, she said. Please tell him Clara Bellamy is here. He'll want to see me. The foreman looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he went. Nathaniel came out of the main house at a pace that told her he had not walked from wherever he had been. He had come quickly, without taking time to consider what pace was appropriate, and when he saw her face, he stopped at the edge of the porch. What did you find? He said. The second affidavit has a procedural error, she said. The witness is listed as residing at the Marsh property on the date of the incident. He moved to Billings in April. If you file a formal objection to the witness qualification before Wednesday's meeting with documentation of Finney's actual residence, Holt has to invalidate the affidavit. Nathaniel stared at her. Does it matter how? A beat. No, he said. No, it doesn't. He turned toward the house. Come inside. I need my father. She had not expected that the direct inclusion, the immediate we of it. She had expected to deliver the information and go. But he was already holding the door open, and there was something in the gesture that was not casual, not performative, but simply the natural motion of a man who had decided a person belonged inside his problems as much as anywhere else. She went in. William Carter was at the kitchen table with maps spread across it, and a coffee cup he had clearly forgotten was there. He looked up when they entered, and when his eyes moved from his son to Clara, something passed through his expression that she could not fully read surprise. Yes, but underneath it, something that might have been relief. She found something, Nathaniel said. Clara explained it again, precisely, without decoration. William Carter listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, we need a record of Finney's Billings residence. Something dated. The county has a forwarding address on file if he registered it, Clara said. Or the Billings County clerk would have any document he signed after April. I can send a wire to Billings today, William said. He looked at her with the full recalibration she had seen beginning in the boarding house parlor, the one that had been building since Monday, now arrived at something like completion. Miss Bellamy, sir, you're a considerable woman, he said. It was not flattery. It was assessment, the particular plain tone of a man who has revised something and is stating the revision without apology. I've had to be, she said. William Carter nodded once. He reached for the coffee cup, noticed it was cold, and set it back down. Nathaniel, he said without looking up from the maps. Ask Mrs. Grady to put another plate out for lunch. Clara looked at Nathaniel. He was already looking at her. The real smile, the one she had seen once before, the one she suspected he did not produce cheaply, was back. Quieter this time, private and precise. "Yes, sir," he said. The wire came back from Billings on Tuesday evening. Jacob Finney had signed a rental agreement dated April 12th, 11 days before the alleged trespass incident at a boarding house on Fletcher Street in Billings. The county clerk had stamped it. It was clean, dated, unambiguous. William Carter rode to the county building first thing Wednesday morning with the wire transcript and a formal written objection to the witness qualification in the second Marsh affidavit, signed by himself and co-signed by their lawyer, a man named Henderson, who had handled Carter Ranch business for 15 years and had the particular energized quality of a man handed a clear case after months of ambiguous ones. Clara went to the Wednesday meeting. She told herself she was going because she wanted to understand the process. She told herself she was not going because she was afraid of what might happen if she was not there. She went early enough to find a seat along the back wall, the practical wall, the one where people sat who were present to observe rather than to be observed. The room filled. She saw Margaret Beaumont arrive with her husband and take seats near the front. She saw three men she recognized as Marsh's associates settle in a group to the left. She saw Henderson, the Carter lawyer, arrange his papers at the front table with the organized efficiency of a man who was not worried. Gideon Marsh came in at 5 past the hour. She had not seen him before except at a distance, and he was not what she had pictured. He was ordinary-looking middle height, middle age, the kind of face that would not stay in memory, except for the particular quality of his eyes, which were the pale, flat color of shallow water and moved through the room with the rapid, assessing motion of someone who was continuously calculating. His eyes found her. She did not look away. He looked away first. Commissioner Holt opened the meeting with the formal language of a man who had been doing this long enough that the words came out with the fluencies of something memorized rather than composed. He described the complaint. He described the Carter response. He described the procedural challenge. Then he turned to Marsh's lawyer and said, "Mr. Crane, your response to the witness qualification objection." Crane was a thin man with a careful mouth. He stood and said, with the smooth precision of someone who had prepared this, "Commissioner, while we acknowledge the technical discrepancy in the residence notation, the substance of the witness's testimony." The substance of the testimony, Henderson said, from his side of the table, without standing up, is attached to an affidavit that lists the witness at a location where he was not residing on the date in question. A Billings County clerk's stamp on a rental agreement, dated April 12th, confirms this. The affidavit is procedurally invalid. The witness can be redeposed. Redeposition requires a 30-day notice period under county procedure, Henderson said, which means the existing complaint cannot proceed on its current timeline. Holt looked at his papers. Marsh was very still. Clara watched him. She watched the calculation happening behind those pale eyes, the rapid, adaptive recalibration of a man who had planned for a clear runway and found an obstacle on it. He was not defeated. She understood that. A man like Marsh did not become defeated by a single procedural setback. He became redirected. The question was where. "Commissioner Holt," Marsh said. He had not waited for his lawyer. He had not stood through the proper channels. He simply spoke in the flat, certain voice of a man who had decided that the formal mechanisms were no longer serving him, and he would go around them. The room shifted. "Commissioner Holt," he said again, and this time he turned slightly so that his voice carried to the room, rather than just the front table. "I think we all understand what's happening here. The Carter Ranch has been struggling with management since young Carter took over. This water claim, this objection, it's a family being propped up by." He paused, and the pause was pointed, deliberate, aimed outside influences that have attached themselves to the ranch's difficulties. The room went very quiet. Clara felt it before she understood it, the specific quality of a crowd that has realized the conversation has shifted into something personal. Marsh was not looking at Commissioner Holt anymore. He was looking at the back wall. He was looking at her. "There are people in this room," he said, carefully, "who have taken a significant interest in Carter business. And this community deserves to ask why a woman with no stake in this county's land business has been involved in the collection and presentation of documents that affect a formal county proceeding." Margaret Beaumont's chin lifted. 3 of Marsh's associates straightened. Henderson was already on his feet. "Commissioner, this line of commentary is entirely—" "It's a fair question," Marsh said, smooth and certain. "Who is advising the Carter family? On what basis? And what do they stand to gain?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Clara felt the room do what rooms do when an ugly suggestion has been made in a social setting, that collective held breath, that waiting, that particular cowardice of people who are horrified but not quite willing to be the first to say so. She stood up. She had not planned to stand up. Her body made the decision before her mind fully authorized it, and she was on her feet in the back row before she had entirely decided what she was going to say. But she was standing, and the room had seen her stand, and there was no version of the next 30 seconds that did not require her to speak. "My name is Clara Bellamy," she said. Her voice came out level, clear, carrying without effort. "I work at the Hutchins boarding house. I have no financial stake in the Carter Ranch, and no legal standing in this proceeding." Marsh's lawyer was already half rising. She kept going. "What I do have," she said, "is 11 years of experience helping my father navigate county filing requirements before he left. And the specific knowledge that the county clerk's records are public documents that any citizen of this county has the right to examine." She looked at Commissioner Holt, not at Marsh. "The objection filed by the Carter family is based on a dated document from the Billings County Clerk. The document is accurate. The procedural challenge is valid. That has nothing to do with who brought the information to the family's attention and everything to do with whether the affidavit meets the county's own standards. A beat. If Mr. Marsh has evidence that the Carter Ranch has trespassed on his property," she said, "he is welcome to file that evidence correctly, with witnesses who can be confirmed, and the county process will handle it. But what he has filed currently does not meet that standard." She paused. "Sir." The last word was addressed to Commissioner Holt. Who was looking at her? The whole room was looking at her. She sat back down. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Henderson said, quietly but distinctly, "The objection stands, Commissioner." Holt looked at his papers. He looked at Marsh. He looked at Crane. He looked briefly at the back wall. "The formal objection to witness qualification is sustained," he said. "The second affidavit is set aside pending re-deposition notice. The trespass complaint cannot proceed on its current timeline." He shuffled his papers with the efficient motion of a man closing something. "We're adjourned." The room broke apart. Marsh stood very still for 3 seconds, then turned and walked out without speaking to anyone, which told Clara more about what had just happened than anything else in the room. Margaret Beaumont's husband said something to his wife in a low voice. She did not respond. She was looking at the back wall with an expression Clara had not seen on her before, not hostility, not the practiced dismissal. Something more complicated, something that looked, uncomfortably, like the beginning of a reassessment. Henderson crossed to Clara before she could stand. "Miss Bellamy Henderson, Carter family lawyer." He extended a hand. "That was exceptionally well done. I just stated facts," she said. "Ma'am," he said, with genuine precision, "in a county meeting, stating facts clearly at the right moment is considerably rarer and more valuable than most people appreciate." She shook his hand. She gathered herself, straightened her dress, and walked toward the door. Nathaniel was in the corridor outside. He had not been in the room. She had not seen him, and she would have, and she realized now that he had waited outside for the duration, which told her that he had known, or suspected, that Marsh might use her presence against the family's case if he was there to visibly confirm the association. He had stayed out to protect her, and she had walked into the room and protected herself anyway. When she came out, he looked at her face and said nothing for a full 3 seconds. Then Henderson said it went well. Henderson was being generous. Was he? Marsh invalidated his own complaint, she said. I just pointed at what was already there. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. You stood up, he said, in front of that room. Someone had to. Clara. He said her name the way he had been saying it for weeks now, like it meant something specific, like it had a weight he was not careless with. Are you all right? She thought about the question. She thought about Marsh's pale eyes finding her across the room, and the crowd's held breath, and the specific, clarifying anger of being used as a weapon against the people she was trying to help. She thought about standing up without planning to and opening her mouth, and finding to her own surprise that she had something worth saying, and a voice loud enough to say it. Yes, she said, and she meant it differently than she had meant it over the serving table 3 weeks ago, when she had said it automatically, reflexively, the way she said everything that was meant to make her smaller. She meant it with the particular solidity of someone who has just done something they did not know they were capable of and found that the ground held. Yes, she said again, I'm all right. Nathaniel reached out and covered her hand with his briefly, just the span of 3 seconds, in the corridor of the county building where anyone might see. He did not look ashamed. She did not pull away. And somewhere behind them, through the closed meeting room door, they heard the sound of the room resuming its noise, the shuffled papers, the shifted chairs, the voices of a community in the process of deciding what it had just witnessed and what that meant. Neither of them moved. They stood in the corridor together and let the county make its noise, and for the first time since a July night 3 weeks ago, when a man she did not know had walked across a ballroom and offered her his hand, Clara Bellamy felt something she had no practiced defense against. Not hope exactly. She had had hope before. Hope was fragile and contingent, and she had learned its cost. This was something sturdier than hope. This felt like ground. The story got out by evening. Not Marsh's version. His version had the advantage of existing first, but it had the significant disadvantage of having been witnessed by a room full of people who had seen it collapse in real time. And stories that collapse in public tend to get replaced quickly by the truer, more interesting version. The truer, more interesting version was, a boarding house maid stood up in a county meeting and quietly dismantled a powerful man's false complaint using public records and a document from Billings. That was a story Willow Creek was capable of understanding. Not everyone approved. Clara was not naive enough to expect universal approval, and she did not receive it. On Thursday morning, she went to the butcher, and 2 women she recognized stepped slightly aside on the pavement in the particular way that contains a judgment without articulating one. Mrs. Pollard had developed a habit of looking past Clara's shoulder when they were in the same room, as though something more interesting was perpetually happening just behind her. But Thursday afternoon, Ellen Purdy came to the boarding house back door and pressed a small paper packet of lavender into Clara's hands and said, I didn't tell you anything on Monday, and then went back down the alley before Clara could respond. Thursday evening, the Carter Ranch's lead hand, a leathery, taciturn man named Abe, who had worked for William Carter for 22 years, tipped his hat to Clara on the main road and said, Good work, miss, in the clipped, definitive tone of a man who said 5 words where most people said 20 and meant all 5 of them. Friday morning, Mrs. Hutchins brought Clara her coffee before she had started the breakfast service, which had happened exactly twice in 11 years, and set it on the counter and said, without preamble or context, I'm raising your wage by $2 a month. Starting September. Clara looked at the coffee, Mrs. Hutchins. Don't argue with me about it, Mrs. Hutchins said. I have enough arguments from the boarders. Clara did not argue. And on Friday afternoon, when she came back from hanging the laundry, she found Nathaniel Carter sitting on the front porch steps with his hat on his knee, and this time she did not count to 10 before she went out to him. And she did not stand at the appropriate distance. And when he looked up at her, she sat down beside him on the step close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and they sat there together in the Friday heat without saying anything for a long moment. "My father asked me last night," Nathaniel said, "what I intend." Clara looked at the road. "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him I intend to ask you something," he said. "When the time is right." Something moved through her fast and warm and frightening, in the way that real things are frightening when you have spent your whole life with the substitute versions. "And when is the time right?" she asked. He looked at her sideways with the expression that was not quite a smile, but contained everything a smile contained. "Not yet," he said. "There's still a fight to finish." She looked back at the road. "Marsh won't stop," she said. "No, he'll find another angle. He will a pause. But so will we." She turned and looked at him directly, and he was looking at her with everything he had been looking at her with since a July night 3 weeks ago, steady, patient. Entirely certain of something she was only beginning to learn to be certain of herself. "So will we," she said, and the word was new in her mouth. Not I. Not him, we. The first person plural of two people who had decided, quietly and without ceremony, somewhere between a dance floor and a county meeting room, that they were no longer navigating separately. The road was quiet, the afternoon held, and Gideon Marsh was still out there with his pale calculating eyes and his redirected anger and whatever he was planning next. And Clara Bellamy did not know what was coming and could not control it, and had a system for exactly this: do not want it, do not count on it, do not let it close enough to cost you. But the system was built for a woman who had nothing to protect. She was no longer that woman, and that, she understood, sitting on the boarding house steps with Nathaniel Carter's shoulder an inch from hers, was both the most wonderful and the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to her. Marsh moved faster than either of them expected. Clara found out on Monday morning, and she found out badly, not through the boarding house walls, not through Ellen Purdy, not through any of the careful, quiet channels she had built over the past weeks. She found out because Margaret Beaumont walked through the front door of the boarding house at 8 o'clock in the morning and asked Mrs. Hutchins to speak with her directly. Mrs. Hutchins came to the kitchen with an expression Clara had never seen on her before. Not alarm, Mrs. Hutchins did not alarm easily. Something more careful than that. Something that understood it was carrying weight. "Front parlor," she said. Clara wiped her hands and went. Margaret Beaumont was standing in the middle of the room, and she was not wearing the expression she had worn every previous time Clara had encountered her. The inventory look was gone. The careful constructed dismissal was gone. What was there instead was something stripped of performance, a woman who had come somewhere with a purpose and was not certain of her reception and had come anyway. "Sit down, Miss Bellamy," she said. Clara sat, not because she was told to, because she wanted to hear this from a level position, and she needed her feet on the floor. Margaret Beaumont sat across from her. "Marsh has filed a complaint with the Territorial Board," she said, without preamble. "Not the county commissioner this time. Higher. He's alleging that William Carter has been operating the ranch on fraudulent land grant documentation, that the original Carter land claim contains a boundary error that, if corrected, would reduce the ranch's legal acreage by nearly a third." Clara went very still. "He found someone to sign an affidavit," Margaret continued. "A land surveyor named Denton from Helena. Denton is claiming the original 1861 survey contained a measurement error on the northern boundary, that the Carter Ranch has been operating on approximately 800 acres they do not legally own." "The Territorial Board," Clara said. "Not the county." "Not the county. Territorial jurisdiction. Commissioner Holt has no authority over it. Henderson has no standing to object." Before filing, she paused. "The board has 30 days to review before they must respond, but during the review period the disputed acreage is technically under examination. They can restrict activity. The north pasture," Clara said. "Yes. That's where the fall cattle are staged before market." "Yes." Clara looked at her hands. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said. Why are you telling me this? The question landed in the room and stayed there. Margaret Beaumont looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that contains a reckoning. The visible process of a woman who has spent a considerable portion of her life being one thing and is in the uncomfortable process of deciding whether to be something else. Because I was in that meeting room on Wednesday, she said. And I watched you stand up in front of Gideon Marsh and the commissioner and every person in that county room, and I watched you do it without flinching, and she stopped. Recalibrated, I have been unkind to you, she said. Not cruelly, not directly, but unkind in the way that women are unkind when they protect a social arrangement that benefits them without examining what it costs others. Another pause. I am not certain I am capable of repairing that, but I am capable of telling you what I know when it matters. Clara looked at her. The room was quiet. How did you find out about the territorial filing? Clara said. My husband sits on the county land committee. He heard about it Saturday evening from a colleague who had received notification. Margaret Beaumont folded her hands in her lap. Marsh has been planning this for weeks. The county commissioner proceeding that was theater. It was designed to lose. He wanted Henderson in the room. He wanted the Carter lawyer's attention on the county level while he was building this. A beat. He's very good at misdirection. Clara stood up. How much time before the board notifies the Carters? The notification goes out today. They'll receive it tomorrow at the earliest. Then I need to go now, Clara said. She was already untying her apron. Miss Bellamy. Margaret Beaumont rose. The surveyor Denton, I don't know if this helps, but my husband says the man has a history. He's testified in 3 land disputes in the past 5 years. 2 of those cases were later overturned when his methodology was challenged. Clara stopped. Which cases, she said. The Alderman boundary dispute in Cascade County and the Morrison water rights case in Jefferson County. Both in the past 3 years. Those are public record, Clara said. Yes. Thank you, she said it plainly, without performance. I mean that. Margaret Beaumont nodded once, and there was something in the nod that was neither comfortable nor easy but was, for the first time since Clara had known her, honest. Clara went out through the kitchen, told Mrs. Hutchins she would be back for the noon meal, or she would send word, and walk north toward the Carter ranch at a pace that was not quite running, but was close enough that 2 people on the main road turned to look at her. She did not care. She had 4 miles of thinking to do and approximately 2 miles to do it in before she ran out of road. Marsh had been patient. That was the thing that needed to sit at the center of every decision they made from here forward. He was not a reactive man. The county complaint had been constructed to fail to occupy Henderson, to fill the legal bandwidth of the Carter family's response, to ensure that when the real blow landed, it landed against people who were already stretched. The theatrical losing of Round 1 was the preparation for Round 2, and Round 2 was territorial jurisdiction, which was slower, broader, and harder to challenge quickly. She thought about Denton, a surveyor with 2 overturned testimonies in 3 years. That was not a coincidence. That was a professional whose methodology had been found wanting by courts, which meant his findings were challengeable on established precedent, not just on the merits of this case, but on his demonstrated pattern of inaccuracy. She thought about the 1,861 land claim, the original survey. If the boundary notation in the original Carter claim was clean, if the measurements matched the Territorial Land Office records from 1,861, then Denton's revised calculation was not a correction. It was a fabrication, and fabrications had paper trails. Fabrications required someone to have made different measurements than the original surveyor. Fabrications required Denton to have access to the land, to have conducted what he claimed was a new survey, and that access and that survey would have had to happen without the Carter family's knowledge on their own land. Clara walked faster. When she arrived at the ranch, Nathaniel was in the yard talking to Abe, and the moment he saw her face, he said something brief to Abe that ended the conversation immediately and came to meet her. She told him everything in 4 minutes. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about him she had stopped being surprised by and had started simply counting on. When she finished, he said, "The north pasture." "Yes. We moved the fall herd up there in 3 weeks." "I know." He was quiet for exactly 5 seconds, the particular silence of a man running the full calculation, following every branch to its end. "He never came on the land," he said, not openly. "I would have known." Then either he surveyed from the boundary line, which limits his accuracy considerably, or someone gave him the original documents, and he worked from those. Nathaniel looked at her. "The original survey documents," he said slowly, "were submitted to the Territorial Land Office in 1861. We have a copy. The office has the original. Does anyone else have access to the Land Office records? Any licensed surveyor can request a review copy for professional purposes." His jaw set. He could have built his false measurement from our own filed documents without ever setting foot on the property. "Which means his survey is theoretical," Clara said. "Not physical. And a theoretical survey that contradicts a 60-year-old field measurement can be challenged with a new physical survey," Nathaniel said. "An independent one. From a surveyor with no connection to Marsh." "How quickly can you get one?" "I know a man in Bozeman. James Whitfield. He's been in practice for 25 years, and he's testified before the Territorial Board twice. His credibility is he stopped. It'll take him 4 days to get here." "Maybe 3 if I wire him today." "Wire him today," she said. He was already turning toward the house. "Clara." He stopped without turning around. "How did you find out about this?" "Margaret Beaumont came to the boarding house this morning." Now he turned. The surprise on his face was genuine and specific, not just surprise at the source, but something more layered, the expression of a man revising a map he thought he had memorized. "Margaret Beaumont," he said. "She was in the county meeting room on Wednesday. She saw what happened." Clara paused. "People change their minds when they see something they weren't expecting. Not all of them and not all the way. But some." He looked at her for a long moment. "You changed her mind," he said. "I stood up in a room," she said. "She did the rest herself." He shook his head slowly, and the expression on his face was one she was beginning to recognize, not admiration exactly, though it contained that. Something more fundamental. The expression of a man who keeps discovering that the person he chose is larger than he had even understood when he chose her. "Go wire Whitfield," she said. "I need to get back before Mrs. Hutchins locks me out." He almost laughed. "Stay for coffee," he said. "My father needs to hear this directly from you." She stayed for coffee. William Carter heard it the same way his son had, without interrupting. With the particular focused stillness of a man who has spent 30 years managing crises and has learned that the first 60 seconds of information are the most valuable, and that any reaction which interrupts them is a waste. When she finished, he said, "Denton's overturned cases." "You said Cascade County and Jefferson County." "Alderman boundary dispute and Morrison water rights," Clara said. "Both in the past 3 years." "I know the Morrison case," William said. He said it with a quality in his voice that made both Clara and Nathaniel look at him. "Elias Morrison. He ranches east of Three Forks. His foreman is a man named Cal Draper. Cal worked on this ranch for 6 years before he moved east." He looked at his son. "Cal would know exactly what Denton did in that case and how it was challenged. He would know the names of the surveyors who disproved it." "You could wire him today," Nathaniel said. "I could wire him today," William agreed. He set down his coffee cup. "And when Whitfield gets here and runs his physical survey, we'll have Denton's precedent from 2 overturned cases, a clean original field measurement from 1861, and a fresh independent survey showing our northern boundary exactly where it has always been." He paused. "That's not a defense. That's a case." Clara looked at the two of them, father and son. The older man's decades of accumulated knowledge finally pointed in the same direction as the younger man's energy and certainty, and felt something move through her that was not her problem to feel, and that she was going to feel anyway. "Miss Bellamy," William Carter said, He said it in the tone he had used at the end of their first meeting, not warmly, because he was not a warm man by default, but with a precision that she had come to understand was his version of it. "My son is going to ask you something soon. I want you to know that when he does, I will not be standing in the way." The kitchen went very quiet. Nathaniel looked at his father. William Carter looked at his coffee cup. Clara looked at the window. "That's thank you, sir," she said, and her voice was entirely level, which she considered the greatest personal achievement of her adult life. "Don't thank me," William said. "Just make sure Whitfield's travel is arranged before noon." Whitfield arrived Thursday evening. James Whitfield was 62 years old, built like a man who had spent 4 decades in physical terrain, and had the particular unhurried authority of someone who had been certain of his own competence long enough that he had stopped needing to perform it. He shook Clara's hand when Nathaniel introduced her and said, "I understand you found the precedent on Denton," in the straightforward tone of a man crediting a tool that worked. "The cases were public record," she said. "Most things are," he said. "Most people don't look." He turned to Nathaniel. "I'll need your original survey documentation and access to the northern boundary at first light." He was on the land by 6 Friday morning. Clara went back to the boarding house and did her work. She made the beds and swept the floors and cooked the noon meal, and told herself she had done what she could do, and the rest was in the hands of a 62-year-old man with 30 years of credible fieldwork and a clear brief. She almost convinced herself. At 3 in the afternoon, Nathaniel came to the back door of the boarding house. She saw his face before he spoke, and something in her chest released a tension she had been holding since Monday morning. "Whitfield's done," he said. "The northern boundary is exactly where the 1861 survey placed it. Not a foot of variance." He said it with the contained quality of a man who is not going to let his relief become undignified in a public doorway, but is feeling it in every part of him. "The measurement Denton submitted to the Territorial Board is off by nearly 200 yards. Whitfield says in 30 years of practice, he has never seen an error of that magnitude that was accidental. He'll testify to that. He'll testify to that before the Territorial Board, in writing, with full documentation, and he'll bring his methodology notes from the 1861 original comparison." A pause. "Henderson is filing the response to the board today. With Whitfield's findings, Denton's precedent from the Morrison case, and the original survey on file in Helena since '61. Another pause, shorter. "Marsh has nothing, Clara. He built it on a fabrication, and we can prove the fabrication line by line." She leaned against the doorframe. The relief was physical, a loosening in her shoulders she had not been aware of holding until it went. "He'll try something else," she said, "maybe." Nathaniel held her gaze. "But not this. Not the land. He's used his surveyor, and now that surveyor's credibility is in the same place it was after Cascade County and Jefferson County. Except this time it's in front of the Territorial Board with a direct comparison to a clean original survey and a 25-year veteran contradicting him point by point." He shook his head. "It's over. This particular fight is over." Clara looked at him. "Your father's land is safe," she said. "Our land," he said. The word landed. She looked at him directly, and he was looking back at her with the full, unguarded certainty that she had been watching accumulate across 6 weeks of Sunday afternoons and creek walks and kitchen tables and county meeting rooms. And there was nothing careful about it, nothing held in reserve. "Nathaniel," she quietly, "I know," he said. "Not yet. There's still something I need to do first." "What? I need to do it properly," he said. "You deserve properly." She looked at him for a long moment. "I've never had properly," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." She did not have an answer for that. She was not sure there was one. She turned back into the kitchen, because if she stayed in the doorway looking at him, she was going to do something that was not appropriate for a back doorway on a Friday afternoon in Willow Creek, Montana, and she was a practical woman. Behind her she heard him go. She pressed both hands flat on the kitchen counter. "Mrs. Hutchins, who had been at the far end of the kitchen the entire time and had not made her presence known, said to the pot she was stirring, $2 a month was not enough. I should have said 3, Clara laughed. It came out of her completely without warning, short and real and surprised at itself, the kind of laugh that happens when the body decides the situation is more than it can hold in any dignified way and releases it sideways. Mrs. Hutchins kept stirring. Clara picked up the dish towel. And the afternoon settled around her, warm and ordinary, exactly the way ordinary things feel when you understand for the first time that they are not things you have to survive, but things you are allowed to have. Saturday brought something she had not prepared for. She was coming back from the post office just after 10 when she saw Gideon Marsh on the main road. Not going somewhere. Standing. Specifically positioned between the post office and the boarding house, in the particular way of a man who has calculated where someone will walk. She slowed for exactly 1 step, then she kept her pace. He fell into step beside her without asking. "Miss Bellamy," he said. "Mr. Marsh, I think you and I should have a conversation. I think you and I don't have anything to say to each other that requires privacy," she said. "If you have something to tell me here." He looked around at the open street. A small calculation moved behind those pale eyes. He had wanted a closed room. She was not going to give him one. "All right," he said. "Here then." He kept walking at her pace, which she did not modify. "You're a smart woman. Smarter than most people in this town have given you credit for. I'll say that plainly. Thank you for the assessment," she said. "What you've done for the Carter family, finding the procedural error, the Billings document, the Denton precedent, that's real capability. That's not luck." He paused. "I could use someone like you." She almost stopped walking. She kept going, she said. "My land office. I have more claims under management than my current staff can handle. The kind of detail work you've been doing, records research, filing review, procedural knowledge, I pay well. Better than a boarding house wage." She looked at him then. Straight and direct. "You're offering me a job," she said. "I'm offering you a future," he said. "One that doesn't depend on whether Nathaniel Carter's interest in you survives his father's business pressures." There it was, wrapped in silk and placed on a table like a gift. Clara stopped walking. She turned to face him fully, which she had not done until now, and she looked at Gideon Marsh with the clear, unhurried attention of a woman who has been underestimated by better people than him and has developed a reliable system for this moment. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "I'm going to make sure I understand you correctly. You spent 3 months trying to take the Carter Ranch's water rights, their grazing permits, and their land grant. You built a false trespass complaint and hired a surveyor with a documented history of inaccuracy to fabricate a boundary error. And now, because those efforts failed, you are offering me employment." He did not respond immediately. "You are trying," she said, "to purchase my distance from the Carter family. Because you have realized that my proximity to that family costs you something, and you would like to correct that at a price that is lower than continuing to fight a case you are losing. A beat. That's a very reductive way of looking at a genuine offer," he said. "Mr. Marsh," she kept her voice even conversational. "I grew up with nothing. I have been told my entire life what I am and am not worth, what I am and am not capable of, and where I belong and where I don't. I have been offered pity, and I have been offered dismissal, and I have been offered the particular brand of concern that is actually a request for compliance." She paused. "This is the first time I have been offered a bribe." His expression tightened. "I want you to hear my answer clearly," she said. "No, now and permanently. Not because of the Carters, specifically because of what you're assuming about me. You assume I can be redirected by money because you think that's what I'm after. You think I've attached myself to Nathaniel Carter the same way you attach yourself to everything instrumentally. You think everything is a transaction and everyone has a price." She held his gaze. "I don't have a price. I have a direction, and it is not toward anything you're offering." Marsh looked at her for a long moment. The pale eyes did their rapid calculation. Then he said very quietly, "You're making a mistake." "I've made mistakes before," she said. "This isn't one of them." She turned and walked the rest of the way to the boarding house. She did not look back. Her hands were cold again. Her heart was loud in her ears. She went in through the front door, crossed the hall, went into the kitchen, and stood at the sink with the water running over her wrists until the cold receded. Then she dried her hands. Then she went and knocked on Mrs. Hutchins's office door. "Come." She went in. "Gideon Marsh just offered me a job," she said. Mrs. Hutchins looked up from her ledger. "He what?" "Employment at his land office, records work. He positioned it as an opportunity and it was a bribe." She kept her voice steady. "I told him no. I wanted you to know in case he comes to you with a different version of the conversation." Mrs. Hutchins set down her pen. She looked at Clara with the expression she had worn 11 years ago when a 15-year-old girl with no parents and no prospects had appeared at her back door, and she had made a decision that she had never, in 11 years, appeared to regret. "Did he threaten you?" she said. "Not directly. He said I was making a mistake." Men like that always say that when they don't get what they want. She picked up her pen. "You did right. And if he comes here, I'll send him off with a shorter conversation than you gave him." Clara almost smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Hutchins. Don't thank me." "Go start the bread." She went to start the bread. And she was elbow-deep in dough 20 minutes later when the back door opened, and she turned, and Nathaniel was there, not on his usual schedule, not announced, just there, the way he had started being there. As if the distance between the ranch and the boarding house had gradually stopped feeling like an obstacle and started feeling like a commute. He looked at her face. "What happened?" he said. "Marsh offered me a job." The stillness that came over him was different from his usual stillness. It was the particular stillness of a man controlling something large. "When an hour ago, on the main road, he approached you on the street." "Yes, Claire, I handled it," she said. "I know you handled it." He came fully into the kitchen and stopped 3 feet from her, which was closer than he usually stood indoors, close enough that she was aware of the specific, warm fact of him as a physical presence in the room. "I'm not worried about whether you handled it. He stopped. His jaw worked. "He approached you alone on the street." "Nathaniel." She kept her voice level. "He said no more than 6 sentences to me. I said more than that back. He left. I came home." She held his gaze. "He's running out of moves. He's not the kind of man who runs out of moves." "No," she agreed, "but he's running out of moves that work." She looked at him directly. "Stop looking at me like I'm something that needs to be protected from the weather. I've been standing in worse than Gideon Marsh my whole life." He looked at her. A long moment. Something shifted in his face, the protective anger draining, not gone but managed, replaced by something steadier and more honest. "I know you have," he said quietly. I don't want you to have to anymore." The kitchen was very quiet. The bread dough sat between them on the counter, patient and indifferent. "You can't stop people from being who they are," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I can make sure you're not standing alone when they are." She looked at him. He looked at her. And the thing that had been building since a July night 6 weeks ago, since 4 minutes of music, and a jar of honey, and a creek walk, and a county meeting room, and a Saturday morning bribe refused on an open street, arrived at something she did not have a word for, but that sat in her chest with the unmistakable weight of a thing that was real and was not going anywhere. "Nathaniel," she said, "not yet. I told you. I need to do it properly. You're the most stubborn man in Montana," she said. "Third most," he said. "My father has me beat, and so does Abe." She laughed again, the same surprised, involuntary sound that had escaped her in Mrs. Hutchins's kitchen 2 weeks ago, and this time it stayed longer. And he was smiling, the real smile, the one she had decided was hers even before she had any right to claim it. "Sunday," she said. "Sunday," he agreed. He left. She turned back to the bread. And somewhere on the other side of town, Gideon Marsh was sitting with his pale calculating eyes and his narrowing options and whatever he was going to try next, and Clara Bellamy, who had spent 26 years being the woman nobody planned for, kneaded the dough with steady hands and thought about Sunday. Not with the careful, self-protective reasoning of a woman managing her expectations. With something that had no system. Something that felt, finally, exactly like the right kind of dangerous. Sunday came with the particular quality of a day that is decided to mean something. Clara was up before 5 the way she always was. She made the boarders' breakfast, washed the dishes, swept the kitchen floor. Ordinary things, done in the ordinary sequence, except that her hands were not entirely ordinary this morning, and she was aware of them in a way she was not usually aware of hands, the slight tremor in the left one when she poured the coffee. The way she pressed both of them flat against the counter after the dishes were done and held them there until they steadied. She did not know what today was. She knew what she hoped it was, and she had spent 6 weeks carefully not naming that hope out loud, because named things became real things and real things could be lost, and she had a system. And the system was still technically in operation, even though it had been losing ground since approximately the moment a man she did not know had crossed a ballroom floor and offered her his hand. Mrs. Hutchins came into the kitchen at 8 and looked at her with the expression of a woman who had been watching something develop for 6 weeks and had developed comprehensive opinions about it. "Eat something," she said. "I'm not hungry. Eat something anyway." She set a plate of biscuits on the counter. The good biscuits, the ones she made on Sunday mornings for the boarders who paid extra. You think better when you've eaten. Clara ate a biscuit. It helped, marginally. She changed into the blue dress at 11. The blue dress she had mended 4 times. She had considered briefly the question of whether she should have something new by now, whether 6 weeks of Sundays with Nathaniel Carter entitled her to a new dress, and had discarded the question immediately because it was the wrong question. She was not trying to become something she was not. That was the thing he had said to her in the first 4 minutes they had ever spent together, and it was the thing she kept returning to. You were the only person in this room who wasn't performing. She put on the blue dress and checked her pins and went downstairs. He was already there, not at the door. Not at the bottom of the steps. He was sitting on the front porch with his hat on his knee and a small package in his hands, and when she opened the door he looked up and something moved across his face that she had learned to read over 6 weeks of careful, involuntary study, the particular expression of a man who keeps finding that the person he is looking for is exactly where he expected and is still surprised by it. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He stood. He was wearing the clean shirt, the summer sky one, and his working trousers and his good boots. He had dressed the way he always dressed, like himself. Like a man who had nothing to prove. "I brought something." He held out the package. She took it and unwrapped the paper. Inside was a length of fabric, pale blue soft, the kind that cost more than she spent on herself in 3 months. Not silk. Something practical and beautiful at the same time, the kind of fabric a person chose when they understood both what things cost and what things were worth. She looked at it for a long moment. "Nathaniel," she said. "I know you have the blue dress," he said. "I like the blue dress." "But I thought," he stopped. "Tried again. I wanted you to have something that wasn't mended." Clara looked at the fabric in her hands. She had promised herself she would not be undone by small things. She had been holding that promise for 6 weeks with considerable effort. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was level, and she was proud of it. "There's something else," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with the expression she had been watching build for 6 weeks, not the almost smile, not the patient regard, not the certainty she had come to rely on as a fixed point in the variable geography of her life. Something more open than all of those. Something that had put down its guard entirely. "Walk with me," he said. "I'd like to go to the creek." They went to the creek. They walked side by side the way they always walked, at the same unhurried pace, and the silence between them had the quality it always had comfortable, inhabited. A silence between two people who had stopped needing to fill the space between them with noise to prove something. But there was a different weight to it today. She felt it in the way he walked, more deliberate than usual, his attention not on the road ahead but pulled inward. The way a person is when they are carrying a sentence they have been composing for some time and are deciding whether the moment has arrived. The moment arrived at the cottonwood. He stopped. She stopped beside him. He turned to face her, and Nathaniel Carter, who had spent 30 years learning to be deliberate and careful with everything that mattered to him, looked at Clara Bellamy with the kind of certainty that does not require performance or declaration to be understood, the kind that is simply present, the way gravity is present. The way the creek beside them was present, just a fact of the physical world, and said, "I've been trying to decide how to do this properly." "Have you figured it out?" she said. "No," he said. "But I've decided that waiting until I figure it out means waiting longer than I'm willing to wait." He took a breath. "I'm going to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you argue with me." "I don't argue, Clara." "Fine," she said. "Go ahead." He looked at her. "I have known you for 6 weeks," he said. 6 Sundays, 1 county meeting, 2 kitchen conversations, and 1 Saturday afternoon on a front porch. And I am aware that 6 weeks is not a long time, and I am aware that what I'm about to say is going to seem by most reasonable standards premature. A pause. I don't care about most reasonable standards. I've watched reasonable men make comfortable decisions and end up hollow, and I have spent 30 years being careful about every significant thing in my life, and I am not willing to be careful about this. She was not breathing. Not fully. "You told me the first Sunday that you didn't have anything to give a man like me," he said. "You were wrong. You have given me more in 6 weeks than I have found in 30 years of looking. You found my family's water claim when we were about to lose it. You stood up in front of Gideon Marsh and a room full of people who had decided what you were, and you spoke plainly and you did not flinch. You found the error in his affidavit and the precedent in Denton's history, and you walked 2 miles to my ranch on a Monday morning to make sure we had time to fight back." His voice was steady and low and entirely without theater. "And you did all of that not for what you could get from it, but because it was right. Because that's who you are." He paused. "I am asking you to marry me, Clara. Not because you need me. I understand that you don't need me. I'm asking because I need you, because the version of my life that doesn't have you in it is a version I am not interested in living." The creek ran. The cottonwood was still. Clara looked at him and felt the full weight of 26 years, the 12-year-old without a mother, the 15-year-old making beds in someone else's house. The woman who had learned to be invisible because the world had made it clear it preferred her that way, and she felt all of it, and she did not put it away this time. She let it be there, and she let this be there beside it. "I am not a simple choice," she said. "I want you to understand that. Not because of what I am or am not, but because of what people will continue to say. Not everyone is Margaret Beaumont. Not everyone changes their mind. I know that. Your life will be more complicated with me in it than it would be without me. My life will be more alive with you in it," he said. "Complicated I can manage, empty I cannot." She looked at him. "You're certain?" she said. "Clara." He said her name with the full weight of every time he had said it over 6 weeks, all of it accumulated and present. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." She breathed. "Yes," she said, one word. She had thought in the abstract that a moment like this would require more. More ceremony, more language, more of the elaborate emotional architecture that the stories she had heard as a girl seemed to demand. She had not expected it to be this simple, this clean. But Nathaniel Carter had always had a way of making things exactly as complicated as they needed to be, and no more, and she had learned to trust that, and yes was the right word, and she had said it and it was done. He reached out and took her hand the same way he had taken it on the dance floor 6 weeks ago, steady and unhurried, and held it. And they stood beside the creek in the July heat, with everything that had just been decided settling around them like weather clearing. I need to tell Mrs. Hutchins, she said after a while. Yes, she's going to say something specific and impossible to predict. Probably. And your father already knows I was going to ask you today, he said. He made me promise to tell him the answer before supper. She looked at him. You told your father before you asked me? He asked me directly if I intended to ask you, and I don't lie to my father. She absorbed this. William Carter, she said, is going to be insufferable about this. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, with the expression of a man who has already accepted this and found it worth the cost. She laughed, and this time it was not the involuntary surprise sound that had been escaping her at intervals for 6 weeks. It was full and real and unhidden, the laugh of a woman who had just said yes to something and could feel the yes all the way through her, and it changed the whole quality of the morning, the air, the creek. The particular angle of the sun made everything suddenly and irrevocably more. Nathaniel was smiling, the real smile, the one she had decided was hers. Come on, she said. We need to tell Mrs. Hutchins before she figures it out herself and considers herself cheated. They walked back. Mrs. Hutchins was in the kitchen when they came through the back door together. She looked at Clara's face, and then at Nathaniel's face, and then at their joined hands, and said, to the pot on the stove, finally. Clara opened her mouth. Don't thank me, Mrs. Hutchins said. I didn't do anything. Go tell your father, Mr. Carter, before the man loses his mind waiting. Nathaniel looked at Clara. Clara looked at Mrs. Hutchins, who was already stirring the pot with the focused attention of a woman who has witnessed something significant and is going to the considerable effort of pretending she hasn't. $3 a month, Clara said. Mrs. Hutchins stopped stirring. Excuse me? 2 wasn't enough. 3, a pause. The wedding is on me, Mrs. Hutchins said. The food. I'm not negotiating. Clara felt the word wedding land in the room with the particular solidity of a word that has become real. Not abstract, not a future possibility carefully held at arm's length by a woman with a system. Real present. Hers, yes, ma'am, she said. She looked at Nathaniel. He was looking at her with everything he had. They told William Carter that evening. He was in the ranch house sitting room, with maps he had been pretending to study. And when they came in together, he looked up and references in approximately 2 seconds, and set the maps down with the deliberate motion of a man who has been waiting for news and is now choosing how to receive it. Nathaniel said. She said yes. William Carter looked at his son for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. He stood up. He crossed the room. He extended his hand, not with the formal testing quality of their first meeting in the boarding house parlor, but with something that had traveled a long way from that morning and arrived somewhere the man himself might not have predicted. Welcome to this family, Miss Bellamy, he said. She took his hand. Clara, she said. Something shifted in his face. Private and real, and not the kind of thing a man like William Carter would describe to anyone, but visible to anyone who was paying attention. Clara, he said. The engagement was known in Willow Creek by Tuesday. Clara did not announce it. She did not need to. The news moved the way all news moved in a town this size, through the particular velocity of a community that has been watching something build and has been waiting for the confirmation it already expected. The reactions came in layers. Ellen Purdy appeared at the boarding house back door on Wednesday morning with a jar of strawberry preserves and the expression of a woman who is trying very hard not to grin and failing. She hugged Clara, briefly and firmly, said I'm so glad, and left before Clara could respond. Abe, the ranch foreman, said nothing. He tipped his hat slightly deeper than usual when he passed Clara on the main road Thursday afternoon, and that was enough. Henderson, the Carter family lawyer, sent a note that said simply, Well done, Miss Bellamy. On all counts, the harder reactions came too, because they always did. A woman Clara recognized from the Dawson ball, one of the mothers, a Mrs. Farwell stopped her on the street Friday morning and said, with the particular expression of a woman who has decided she is performing a community service, People are talking, Clara. I hope you understand what you're walking into. His circle will never fully accept you. No matter what he says now in 10 years, Mrs. Farwell Clara said pleasantly. I have been managing this town's opinion of me since I was 12 years old. I believe I can manage it from a ranch house as well as from a boarding house. Possibly better. Have a good morning. She walked on. Her hands did not go cold. She noticed the absence of the cold, the steadiness of the hands, and recognized it as something that had changed somewhere between a Monday morning and a creek walk and a yes said beside a cottonwood tree. She was still the same woman. She was still going to be talked about and assessed, and found wanting by people who needed the arrangement of her at the bottom of a social order to feel comfortable at the top of one. But she was no longer carrying it alone. That changed the weight of everything. Gideon Marsh made one final move. She had expected it. Nathaniel had expected it. The only question had been the shape of it, and the shape turned out to be a letter delivered to William Carter through an intermediary, proposing a formal mediated settlement of all outstanding land and water disputes. In exchange for the Carter Ranch's agreement to sell the south parcel at a price Marsh named, which was fair market value and not $1 above. William Carter read it. He passed it to Nathaniel. Nathaniel read it. He passed it to Clara. She read it at the kitchen table with both of them watching her, and she set it down when she was finished and looked at William. He's offering fair price, she said. He is, William said. And a clean settlement on everything else. Yes. He wants out, she said. He spent 3 months fighting a war he kept losing, and now he wants to close the account and move on to something that will work better. She looked at the letter. He's not apologizing. He's not admitting fault. He's offering money, which is the only currency he understands, and he wants it done. The question, Nathaniel said, is whether we sell. Clara looked at him. Do you want the south parcel, she asked. It's good land. That's not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. It's land we've run cattle on for 20 years. It's part of what this ranch is. Then don't sell it, she said. William looked at her. Marsh won't stop entirely, not forever. No, she agreed. But his surveyor is compromised. His county filing failed. His territorial complaint failed. And he's offered you fair market value, which means he's already decided this particular war is too expensive. He'll move his attention somewhere else. She paused. Men like Marsh always do. They're not fighters. They're calculators. When the math stops working, they find a new equation. The kitchen was quiet. William Carter picked up the letter. He looked at it for a long moment with the expression of a man doing a calculation of his own, not about land, not about money, but about something more fundamental. The kind of calculation that a man who has spent 30 years building something makes when he tries to measure what it is actually worth. He set the letter face down on the table. Write him back, he said to Nathaniel. Tell him the south parcel is not for sale. Tell him we accept the settlement on the outstanding disputes. And tell him that if his cattle so much as breathe on our boundary line in the next decade, we'll have Henderson in front of the territorial board before the week is out. Nathaniel nodded. He looked at Clara. She looked back. There was nothing more to say about Gideon Marsh, and so neither of them said anything. They were married on the first Saturday of September. The church was small, and the day was warm, and Clara wore a dress that was not the blue cotton, one she had mended 4 times, and not the pale fabric Nathaniel had brought her on that last Sunday morning. She wore something Mrs. Hutchins had quietly commissioned from a seamstress in Billings 2 weeks after the engagement was announced, a cream-colored dress, simple and well-made, the kind of dress that asked nothing of the woman wearing it except to be herself. She carried wildflowers from the ranch's south field, because she had wanted to carry something that was already hers. The church held 40 people, not everyone in Willow Creek, but enough. Ellen Purdy was there. Henderson was there. Abe was there in a jacket that suggested he owned one, but had not previously had occasion to deploy it. Margaret Beaumont was there in the 3rd row. And when Clara walked past her, she looked up and something passed between them that did not require words, the particular acknowledgement between two women who had not started as allies and had arrived somewhere more honest than opposition. William Carter stood beside his son at the front of the church. He had worn his best suit. He had combed his hair with more conviction than usual. When Clara reached the front and turned to face Nathaniel, William leaned slightly toward his son and said, quietly enough that he thought only Nathaniel could hear him, "Good man." Good choice. Clara heard it. She did not show that she heard it. But she held it somewhere in her chest, where she kept the things that mattered. The ceremony was short. The vows were plain. Nathaniel said his with the same quality he brought to everything, direct, certain, with nothing held in reserve. Clara said hers with a steadiness she had not been sure she would manage, and managed entirely. And when the words were done and the moment arrived, he kissed her with the same unhurried, unperformed quality that had characterized every single thing he had ever done in her presence. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the most. Afterward, on the church steps, while the small crowd gathered around them, Clara stood beside her husband, that word, new and real and entirely hers, and felt the particular quality of a moment that has been a long time arriving and has finally irrevocably arrived. Mrs. Hutchins appeared at her elbow. "The food's ready," she said. "Of course it is," Clara said. "Don't let it get cold." Mrs. Hutchins: "What?" "Thank you for everything." "For all of it." Mrs. Hutchins looked at her with the expression she had worn 11 years ago, when a 15-year-old girl had appeared at her back door, and said, in the voice of a woman who has never once regretted the decisions she does not discuss, "Go eat something." "You think better when you've eaten." Clara laughed. And then Nathaniel was beside her, his hand at the small of her back, warm and steady and present, the way he had been beside her since a July night when he had crossed a ballroom floor and done an unreasonable, impractical, entirely correct thing. "Ready?" he said. She looked at the town at Willow Creek, at the main road and the boarding house and the county building and the dry goods store where Mrs. Pollard had tried to manage her expectations over a flower counter, at the street where Margaret Beaumont had inventoried her and later brought her information she did not have to bring, at the creek path to the north where she had walked 6 Sundays and found out what it felt like to be moving toward something instead of away. She looked at her husband. "Yes," she said, the same word she had said beside the cottonwood. The same word that had started all of it, 6 weeks ago, when a woman who had spent her entire life making herself invisible had placed her hand in a stranger's hand on a dance floor and felt something shift, quiet, irreversible, permanent. The woman nobody saw had found at last someone who had never stopped looking. And that first dance, 4 minutes of music in a crowded room, in the summer of 1884, in the small town of Willow Creek, Montana, had not been the beginning of a story. It had been the moment two people recognized a story that was already theirs. And nothing that came after, not Marsh, not the county, not the territorial board, not the whispers or the inventories or the pale flat eyes of a calculating man who had never once understood what he was actually up against, had been enough to stop it. Because the woman Nathaniel Carter had chosen was not a woman who needed to become worthy. She had been worthy every single day of the 26 years she had spent being told otherwise. And from the first Saturday of September, 1884, forward, the whole of Willow Creek slowly, unevenly, in the gradual and sometimes reluctant way that communities revise their understanding of themselves, began to know it too.